My father let me sleep on the streets while he booked overseas vacations. He knew he had the money to help. He just didn't want to spend it on me, so I figured it out myself like I always had. I slept rough in my final semester of college, showed up to class, submitted my coursework, and finished my degree. Then I worked 2 full-time jobs to get into one of the most competitive graduate programs in the country. I built a life from nothing because he gave me nothing. And then, years later, out of nowhere, he called me up with a request. His girlfriend needed a place to stay. Could she use my apartment? The apartment I paid for, with the money I earned, while he was booking his 3rd international trip of the year. This is the story of a man who abandoned every responsibility of fatherhood, then showed up with his hand out the moment I had something worth taking. Let me take you back to where this started. My parents divorced when I was young. That part I understood. Marriages end, it happens. What I didn't understand was what came after. My dad remarried quickly, built himself a whole new life, and somewhere in that process, my brothers and I became inconvenient. The estrangement wasn't one dramatic moment. It was a slow fade, missed calls, empty chairs at school events. The creeping, quiet realization that we just weren't a priority anymore. My mom, meanwhile, carried everything. Child support from my dad was effectively non-existent, not because he couldn't afford it, but because he decided not to bother. She paid for our lives, our schools, our futures, mostly on her own. She stretched every dollar. She showed up every single time. And my dad, he was out there thriving. New wife, new vacations, new priorities. We were a chapter he'd quietly decided to close. I spent years trying not to feel the full weight of that, trying to just focus on what was in front of me. But some absences leave a shape. And that shape was always there, even when I didn't name it. When I got older, I made a decision. I was going to build something for myself, with or without him. I moved away to pursue an arts degree. Not the most conventional path, I'll admit, but it was mine, and I owned it completely. I worked part-time jobs to cover my living expenses. Every dollar was accounted for, stretched as far as it could possibly go. My dad never offered to contribute to my education. That was established early and without ambiguity. He had money, real money, the kind that makes a hotel room feel like pocket change. But investing in his kids' futures didn't seem to fit the budget he had in mind. I wasn't bitter about it at the time, honestly. I was too busy surviving to sit with the anger. I just kept moving forward, kept working, kept telling myself it was all going to add up to something real. And I believed that, right up until the moment the floor gave out beneath me. I had no idea what was coming. And neither, it turned out, did he. Because the version of me that was about to be tested was not the version he was counting on. 6 months from the finish line, everything went sideways. There was an emergency in my student housing serious enough that the building became uninhabitable. I had no savings cushion. My part-time wages covered the basics and nothing more. When the housing situation collapsed, the math stopped working, and I had a choice to make. Option 1, leave the city, forfeit my degree, move home, and watch 4 years of work evaporate. Option 2, stay, figure it out, finish what I started. I chose option 2, and that meant, for a stretch of weeks, I didn't have a stable place to sleep. I was homeless, not in a dramatic, made-for-TV way, in the quiet, grinding, relentless way that real homelessness actually works. Finding safe places to wait, moving through each day carrying everything on my back, all while still attending lectures, still completing assignments, still chasing the degree I had sacrificed 4 years for. Does that sound like someone who could have used a little help? Because I was 6 months from done, and I needed a little help, and my father knew. Here is the part that still sits heavy with me. My dad knew. Not every detail, maybe, but enough. He knew things had gotten bad. He knew I was in trouble. And he did nothing. Not a call to ask if I needed help. Not a text with a bank account number. Not a hotel room booked for 1 week just to get me through the worst of it. Nothing. This is a man who, during that same stretch of time, had been taking overseas vacations. The kind that involve long-haul flights and resort hotels and spending money that most people couldn't imagine having. He had the resources. He simply chose not to direct any of them toward his struggling kid. And as devastating as that was, it wasn't actually a surprise. This was the pattern, finally made undeniable. Every year of my education, every sacrifice I'd made alone, every milestone I crossed without so much as a congratulations, this was what all of that looked like with the mask off. He had made his choice a long time ago. I was just, finally, standing in the full light of it. And I was not going to forget. But I finished. I need you to really hear that. I was temporarily homeless, completely alone in the final year of a bachelor's degree, and I finished. My degree was awarded. No celebration from his side, no acknowledgement, no call. Just me and the work and the quiet private knowledge that I had done something genuinely, measurably hard. And then I went home. Not to him, home. And I worked. 2 full-time jobs simultaneously, not as a temporary fix but as a deliberate strategy. Because I had my eyes on the next rung, a clinical graduate program, the kind where the acceptance rate makes most people flinch before they even apply. I saved. I applied. I prepared. And I got in. Then I got an apartment. My own space. My own terms. Funded entirely by my own labor, built on the foundation of everything he never gave me. I want you to hold that image for a moment, because we are about to need it. A daughter who survived her father's absence and built something real from the rubble. Remember that. It matters more than you know right now. The call came without warning. My dad, the man who had never once made the 4-hour drive to visit me in 7 years of higher education, not once called me up. His voice was warm on the phone. Friendly, even, casual. His partner had a family member in the hospital nearby, he explained. They needed somewhere to stay. Could she use my apartment? I'm going to pause here because I need you to feel the full weight of what was just asked. This is the man who contributed nothing to my education while my mother stretched herself thin to cover it. This is the man who stood by while I navigated homelessness in my final semester and did not pick up the phone. This is the man who, in 7 years of school, never visited. Not for graduation, not for a birthday, not for any reason at all. And here he was calling me, warm and casual and friendly, asking to use the home I had built with my own hands, as if the previous 7 years had simply not happened. As if we were the kind of family that did things for each other. We were not that family. He had made sure of it. I said no, politely and clearly. No, and that should have been the end of it. It was not. They kept pushing, multiple times, and when the asking didn't work, they changed tactics entirely. They started in on my finances. Why was I still paying rent on my apartment while I went home for the summer? That's wasteful, they said. That doesn't make financial sense. Let me say that back to you slowly. The man who never paid child support, who never contributed $1 to my education, who had taken 2 separate overseas vacations in the 2 months before this conversation, that man was lecturing me about financial responsibility. The cognitive dissonance required to do that is staggering. And underneath the financial critiques, I could feel the older stuff rising to the surface. Years of being treated differently from my brothers. Years of carrying blame that was never mine to hold. Years of being made to feel like my needs were an inconvenience, my existence an afterthought. I had spent a long time learning to set all of that aside, but it was never gone. It was right there, fully intact, waiting for exactly this moment. So I drew the line, not with rage, not with tears, with clarity, the kind that only comes from having thought about something for a very long time. I told him exactly what was not going to happen. I was not going to let anyone stay in my apartment, the apartment that represents every single thing I built without him. I was not going to justify my financial decisions to a man who never invested $1 in my future. I was not going to make myself smaller to accommodate someone who watched me go through homelessness and made a deliberate choice to do nothing. And then I told him some of the rest of it. The 7 years of no visits. The financial support that never came when I needed it most. The pattern of his absence, consistent and documented and real. I don't know exactly how he received it, but I know something shifted, because the asking stopped. No more follow-up calls, no more critiques, no more friendly, casual warmth that didn't match the history behind it, just silence. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, the silence felt like mine, not imposed on me, chosen. Those are completely different things. That silence held. My apartment stayed mine. My master's program continued. And my dad, the man who would rather spend thousands on international travel than offer his struggling kid a single dollar during her worst year, had nothing left to leverage. Because he had never invested anything in me to leverage in the first place. That is the strange, quiet math of karma. He withheld his support for years, maybe expecting me to fail, or to remain dependent on whatever scraps of goodwill he might someday offer. Instead, I built something he cannot access. Something he has no claim to. Every financial critique, every pointed question about my choices, every sideways comment, all of it landed on someone who had already survived far worse than his disapproval. That is the thing about people who remove their support, assuming it will keep you small. Sometimes it does not. Sometimes you find out exactly what you are made of. And sometimes, when they come back around expecting access to what you have built, the answer is a simple, clean, completely unmovable no. Not dramatic, not angry, just no, and the door closes quietly. There is a version of this story where I feel only sadness, where I mourn the father I didn't get, the support that should have been there, all the years I spent figuring it out completely alone. And honestly, sometimes I do. That grief is real, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But mostly, when I look at where I am right now, the degree I finished under impossible circumstances, the graduate program I earned by working 2 jobs and simply refusing to stop, the apartment that is mine and mine alone, mostly what I feel is something closer to respect. For myself. For the version of me that slept rough during her last semester and still turned in the work anyway. He doesn't get credit for any of that, and he doesn't get access to any of it either. That is not bitterness. That is just the math. You do not get to disappear from someone's life and then expect to show up when things get good. Cold karma doesn't always look like a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it just looks like a door, quietly and permanently closed. If this one landed for you, drop a like and subscribe. Cold karma has plenty more where this came from.